Assassin's Creed is born 18 years ago, and the franchise went through many changes in all these years, both from a mechanical and artistic standpoint. And yet, anyone who, like me, discovered this series right from the start with Assassin's Creed 1 learned to love this franchise not as a commercial product, but first and foremost as an interactive, immensely unique and immersive video game experience. When I bought Assassin's Creed 1, the second installment of the saga was already being talked about in the magazines, and I was attracted by the Italian setting and I wanted it. And I naively thought it had been released. So I went to the GameStop hoping to find it, but I only found it was this cover with a disturbing man dressed in white, with luminous robes and a hidden blade sliding from his wrist, standing out against a background of various shades of blue with the ghost-like silhouettes of people. I was immediately struck, and I know that others, like Willis Makes Movies, had a similar experience. At the time, there were no historical games rooted in reality. There were many fantasy games and many games about the Second World War or games about historical discoveries but set into the present, like Tomb Raider. So this was a revolutionary game for its time and probably affected me so much that it changed my perception of history and the way I see things. What made AC1 and AC2 unique was the extremely clever use of marketing, which was closely linked to what we would have on our consoles. All the aesthetics of the marketing and even the content of the interviews with people like Jade Raymond and Patrice Desilets were organically inherent to the theme of Assassin's Creed 1, a sci-fi game set 5 years ahead in time, where, however, you relive the memories of your ancestors, and all the marketing, aesthetic and art of the first Assassin's Creed touch on the theme of past memories. Altair looked like an angel of death, the NPC looked like ghosts from the past, the Templars looked like grotesque but realistic representation of vice and violence, and this was already evident in the character design, a long line style that then gradually gave to more squat and caricatural characters once technology advances. Yet the primordial engine of the first two Assassin's Creed gave a sense of disorientation, disquiet and ethereal figures lost in time, more than historical games with ultra-realistic engines do today. This was only possible through an intentional and organic art direction, where everything is concentrated in one point and expanded in space. The core of the game was the concept of memory and time, and every visual element was suggestive to give a sense of the passage of time.
C'è qualcosa che non va.
Let's get more specific. What made Assassin's Creed so special from a visual art perspective, and what's different today? Assassin's Creed 1 and 2, in my opinion, stands out completely from the rest of the series for their underlying disturbing nature. It's not an explicit dark tone, but you have a feeling that accompanies you of despair, of pain implied by various elements of the world. Assassin's Creed 1 makes extensive use of environmental design to convey something. Of course, this was also due to technical limitations, but paradoxically, these limitations have given the game a stoic atmosphere, barely perceptible, but it's there. Just visit Masyaf and the Kingdom. Although apparently less dark than Acre or Jerusalem, they present liminal spaces that ignite that sense of reflection during exploration, and this is also helped by the type of soundtrack, with Masyaf giving us a sort of tension that is always present, and the Kingdom instead gives us the sense of journey and distance from home. The environments are usually enriched by visual effects that cannot be said to be 100% realistic, but they help to set the tone and allow us players to see a world in constant change, yet at the same time immobile. Assassin's Creed 1 also makes excellent use of the color palette, always highlighting certain colors such as the red of Altair's belt, or the blood, or the white of his robes, while all the other colors are mutable. Acre is blue and grey, a tone associated with war and death. Damascus is yellow and pink, but with a faded tone that makes us understand that this is not a completely thriving city. It also shows that it is an extremely old city, through assets of ruined houses and cracks in the walls everywhere that makes some areas of the city look like a ghost town. Jerusalem, on the other hand, uses a green tone with hints of blue, both because it is in the midst of the war between the Saracens who control Damascus and the Crusaders who control Acre, and because there is an ethereal and divine tone that helps give a mystical sense to the setting. Even the assets are a mix between the rough style of the stones of Acre and the more polished and elaborate style of the walls of the palaces of Damascus. But what distinguishes this city is obviously the factor linked to its historical and religious importance, and therefore seeing this building ruined by time cannot help but make one think that once in a precise spot Jesus walked among his disciples, or the Romans marched and controlled the city. And even if subconsciously, all these thoughts are transmitted because the artistic work behind them is immensely profound and the result of much research, not only aesthetic but also linked to the field of sensations that we humans experience when faced with the passing of time. Assassin's Creed 2, on the other hand, is a game that at first glance seems to have a totally different tone. The marketing shows Ezio as a cheeky boy with a sense of irony that Altair lacked. His figure is much more elaborate with a much more varied and colorful outfit, and he stands out among the passers whom here too are like ghosts, but this time in a white and red background. So already from here we see that the tone of the game is twofold: white, therefore open and bright, but also red, therefore violent. But what is similar to SC1 is precisely the fantasy of memory and the passage of time. Passers move back and forth without caring about Ezio, giving both the sense of being a blade in the crowd, as is also the case with Altair, but also to show that Ezio and Altair are just someone who acts in the history, but they are not remembered. AC2's marketing emphasized the game's more joyful and playful tone, which is present from the start, but what the player then experiences not only Ezio's famous family tragedy, but also a very specific tone of disorientation and unease, truly latent this time, but perhaps even more impactful once you realize it. The soundtrack, once again by Jesper Kyd, puts religion in the background but does not eliminate it. We hear much more dramatic music, but also very similar to theatrical works, obviously a reference to Italy, which is the setting of the game. However, it is not joyful music. It combines modern instruments with an ancient tone, creating a climax of tension, followed by moments in which the rhythm becomes faster but less tragic, almost relaxing. Yet, the link with AC1 is always there. For example, Forli, in addition to sharing a similar tone with Acre, it also has a much darker soundtrack compared to the AC2 usual soundtrack. It's more similar to Acre's one. This change in tone from San Gimignano, which was still disturbing and disorienting, but more familiar to Ezio in relation to Tuscan and Florence, to Forli is mediated by Gli Appennini, which shares the same soundtrack as the Kingdom of AC1. But here we see some changes that always push toward a dramatization of the tone, which is obviously also a reference to the cultural changes in art underway in Italy, with a medieval to Renaissance tone, which will lead to the theatrical and dramatical tone of the Baroque. It's no coincidence that hearing the same soundtrack as AC1 leads to a dark city that shares much of the style of AC1. And even though you don't do anything important story-wise in this city, you're still impressed and feel like you're in a more familiar land if you've just finished playing Assassin's Creed 1. It's no coincidence, in my opinion, that after finishing this section of the game before Venice, which is a completely separate chapter, you return to the present and experience the bleeding effect, with Desmond passing out and experiencing Altair's memories without the Animus, namely a section in Acre at night, in which you follow your wife Maria, even if we didn't know it at the time, and witness the conception of their son Seth. It's as if Desmond, this is my interpretation, by experiencing that section in Forlì compatible with the Acre section of AC1, atmosphere-wise, has somehow found a connection with Altair's past memory in Acre and therefore explored something through the bleeding effect. If that were intentional, it would be a truly great way to unite the art direction with the narrative. As previously mentioned, Venice is a separate chapter and is also shown as such in the game, being the longest section in a single city. Venice is a cosmopolitan city with artistic and cultural trends linked to ancient Rome and international Gothic, therefore Western, but also Byzantine, Eastern and Greek culture. In this sense, the Venetian Renaissance is a sort of eclecticism between these different styles, and therefore we also see an artistic direction that seeks to showcase both tones, an upland one with the tallest building ever seen in the series up to that point, but also suburban areas that instead have a more subdued tone. There is also a very nautical tone, and it is linked precisely to Eastern culture, very similar to the style of Cyprus in AC Bloodlines. The soundtrack here is infinitely more relaxed and florid, since Venice was at the height of its political and cultural power. But it's also nice to note that the development team has simultaneously tried to give a dual tone to all the distortion of this model of city, a bit like in Damascus, but with a totally different taste obviously. Here, poverty is hidden behind a veil of beauty and very strong control, even by the guards, who are more present than in other cities in the game, so that there is a sort of oppression and decadence in the making. In this sense, we should reconnect with another aspect of the setting, the Renaissance. The color palette is strongly watery and recalls the oil paints of the time, which left that antique look on figures much more easily than later tempera paintings. But also the watercolor-like, almost drawn style of the artist's design and sketches of those times. Whereas in Assassin's Creed 1 everything is much edgier and more disturbing, here everything is much more suspended, perhaps a different kind of uneasiness pervading the normality of life in the Renaissance. We must also remember that this period contained many contradictions. On one hand, the scientific and humanistic rediscovery, progressivism and renewed sense of beauty. On the other hand, the violence and decadence that Italy was about to experience. The Medici assassination was only the beginning of the destruction of the fragile balance that the Peace of Lodi, strongly supported by Lorenzo de' Medici, had brought to Italy, creating for the first time since the early Middle Ages a common sense of Italy, which would later be explored by Machiavelli in his works, The Prince. After Lorenzo's death, the Italian wars followed, definitely subjugating Italy to foreign forces and radicalizing the imperialist position of the Papal State, as we will also see in Brotherhood. All this is made explicit in Assassin's Creed 2 through this passage from Florence, the cradle of the Renaissance, to Venice, which would soon lose the war against the Turks, and it was a city that already contained within itself the seeds of decadence to which Italy would be forced until the arrival of Bonaparte, who would once again indirectly light a fire in the Italian people's consciousness. The unique thing about Assassin's Creed 1 and 2 is that despite dealing with extremely lively and complex themes, Altair and Ezio always remain in the shadows, wandering like ghosts, entering new cities and integrating into them, all with a calm and composure that is typical of the assassins in the imagination of the people. this wandering and patiently making their way through political intrigues and hidden violence is absolutely something unique, something we only seen in these two chapters in a totally organic and coherent way. The only exceptions are perhaps Unity and Origins, but in those two cases, this feeling isn't closely tied to marketing and every element of the game, unlike the first two games of the series. Already with Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, this archetype was set aside to make room for an assassin who enters a large city and conquers it both through stealth and force. Revelation, meanwhile, seeks a middle ground approach, but is unfortunately overshadowed by the large, chaotic missions within it, which hardly convey the sense of wise, shadowy Ezio as the lead writer initially intended. Finally, Assassin's Creed 3 definitely opens up a different assassin archetype, robust, extremely visible and focused on combat. Its artistic direction also goes completely against SC1, an action-packed, epic game that will increasingly lead to a different assassin archetype, more of a warrior than a blade in the crowd. I'm not against having a new different main character archetypes in Assassin's Creed, but it is objective to think that the first two games in the saga are unique in their genre and gives a feeling that is precisely disturbing yet evocative, a sense of disorientation mixed with a certain intrinsic beauty for the discovery and exploration of the story, like a person who will be forgotten in history, who makes his loudest actions when he has to carry out the most important act, assassinating the most important targets, only to then disappear and to remain just one of the many who have assassinated a politician or a figure of power. I would really like this type of game again, but I now know that it will no longer be possible because the creative direction has changed dramatically, and my desire is now the same of a niche of people who wants the old Assassin's Creed formula in its purest sense. But it is now not compatible anymore with Ubisoft commercial needs. On the other hand, many fans of the old AC games see in games like Ghost of Tsushima and Yote partly what Assassin's Creed once was, a game about a mysterious figure who is not well accepted and it is forgotten in history. As demonstrated by the cancellation of a game set after the American Civil War with a former black slave as protagonist, Ubisoft is reluctant to make courageous and even coherent choices to give us complex and thought-provoking stories. Because today in the world it has become dangerous to think, but I don't think that video games should be part of political discourses, because otherwise no games could be made anymore. An important news came out while I was recording this video, that Marc-Alexis Cote has been gently forced to leave the company. Although this is a great news for me because I really don't like Kotae Creative's approach due to its inflation of politically contemporary subjects in the game, where every character of his games proactively participates directly into historical events instead of being just a viewer. Without counting the allegations of permitting abuses against employees from higher-ups figures in Ubisoft. Nonetheless, I'm not 100% sure if the position will be filled with a competent person, or it will be better than Kotae, maybe worse. I really hope that the new lead will have a more thoughtful and cautious approach into their stories and marketing in order to permit a better and impartial analysis of historical events without being divisive, unlike Shadows was. And also that should not permit to have abuses on employees, especially the women, that in the past years suffered several abuses, and the higher-ups, Kotae included, didn't intervene and permit these abuses that are totally disgusting. In the future, I will probably touch more upon the internal problems that Ubisoft is facing and has faced for years, but for now I think it's better to change argument. Going back to Assassin's Creed 1 and Assassin's Creed 2 Dawn, part of this artistic shift in Assassin's Creed is due to Patrice Désilets' departure from Ubisoft, and it's no coincidence that the last game he truly completed was AC2, while he only conceptualized some elements of Brotherhood before leaving. Désilets, like all the best creatives in history, demands a certain focus and consistency in his games. His work as a game designer and creative was certainly omnipresent in every phase of development, and Ubisoft really needs someone who isn't content to simply do their job, but who has the ambition to branch out and intervene in aspects that can make Assassin's Creed unique again, with brilliant ideas that are organic to the game world. Clint Hawking will be working on Assassin's Creed for the first time with Axie, and I sincerely hope he will do a meticulous job not only on the mechanics, but also influencing other aspects of the game that will make it a high-quality artistic and creative product. The truth is, however, that ultimately I will always refer to Patrice Désilets, the creator of Assassin's Creed, not by chance, but because he challenged reality to create a new IP from Prince of Persia, and would have done the same with 1666 Amsterdam, moving on from Assassin's Creed, which in my opinion should have ended in 2012, and introduced something totally different that could still be serialized without necessarily having the same cohesion from one game to the next. One day I will analyze 1666 Amsterdam, but for now I can say that that game was really the worthy successor of Assassin's Creed, a captivating setting, the same sense of disorientation and uneasiness of the first two Assassin's Creed. That's something it's only Désilets and no one else. And I really hope that somewhere with his new studio he is creating a new IP that can compete with those like Assassin's Creed. Because Assassin's Creed needs competition on the front of historical and sandbox games. We have several historical games today, but they are often RPGs or extremely linear games, nothing similar to Assassin's Creed. But if there was something that competed with it, even Ubisoft will be forced to be more courageous and choose whether to make Assassin's Creed a worthy product again, or create a new IP. Today, many indie studios are trying to make games similar to Assassin's Creed, such as Outlast Vengeance, which I recommend you read up on, link in description for his channel. I hope that more and more of these games will be created, and that these small studios will one day give us experiences with all the resources necessary to do more and more. Mine is not a direct criticism to Ubisoft, but a request to listen closely to the fans, even on the creative side, and to consider that one day someone will come along who will try to do what was done with Assassin's Creed. So we need to rediscover the focus on what Assassin's Creed gave players long before Assassin's Creed became similar to all the other action RPG. I hope this change will happen one day, and that we'll truly see a full degree return to the origins of the Assassin's Creed franchise. Thanks for watching my video, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it.